They drained America's most dangerous lake and found something that wasn't supposed to be there. Not trash. Not invasive species. Something that rewrites what we thought we knew about Florida's dark waters. Lake Okeechobee. The liquid heart of Florida. Second largest freshwater lake entirely within U.S. borders. 730 square miles of murky water sitting like a giant puddle in the middle of the Sunshine State. For decades, engineers have been playing God with its water levels, raising and lowering them like a cosmic bathtub. But when they dropped the levels in late 2025, cameras caught something moving in the shallows that made biologists do a double take. We're talking about creatures that shouldn't exist here, in numbers that don't make sense, behaving in ways that break every rule in the textbook. Keep watching, because this discovery isn't just weird, it's a preview of what's coming for the rest of America's waterways. Let's start with the lake itself. Okeechobee. The name comes from the Seminole words Okie and Chubee, meaning big water. And yeah, they nailed it. This thing is massive. Imagine a body of water so large you can't see the other side. Now imagine, it's only 9 feet deep on average. Some spots, 3 feet. You could wade across if you had a few days and a death wish. The lake sits in south-central Florida, acting as the headwaters for the Everglades. Every drop that flows through America's most famous swamp starts here. Or at least it used to, before humans decided to get creative with plumbing. More on that disaster in a minute. Here's what makes Okeechobee genuinely dangerous. It's not the alligators, though there are thousands. It's not even the bull sharks that occasionally swim up from the Gulf. It's the fact that this shallow giant can turn into a liquid buzzsaw in about 20 minutes. When storms roll through, there's nowhere for the wind to go but sideways across the surface. Waves build to 8, 10, 12 feet. In water that's barely deeper than that. Boats get swamped. People disappear. The lake has claimed hundreds of lives over the past century. The worst disaster happened in 1928. Hurricane Okeechobee, Category 4 storm slammed into Puerto Rico, then kept going. On September 16th, it made landfall near Palm Beach with sustained winds of 145 miles per hour. The storm surge pushed lake water over the tiny earthen levees surrounding Okeechobee. Entire towns drowned under 8 feet of water. Bodies floated for weeks. Official death toll was 2,500 people. The actual number? Probably closer to 3,000. Nobody knows for sure, because nobody bothered to count properly. After that nightmare, the Army Corps of Engineers built the Herbert Hoover Dike, 35 feet tall, 143 miles around, basically a concrete ring to keep the lake from eating South Florida. Problem solved, right? Well, not exactly. The dike works great at keeping water in. Maybe too great, because now the Corps has a different problem. They have to actively manage the lake's water level, like they're playing the world's highest stakes game of Jenga. Too high? The dike could fail and flood 500,000 people. Too low? The ecosystem collapses, fish die, drinking water dries up, and farmers lose their minds. So they drain it, and fill it, and drain it again. Release water into the estuaries when levels get too high, pumping billions of gallons of nutrient-rich lake water into the Indian River Lagoon and the Caloosahatchee. This triggers toxic algae blooms that turn the water into green paint and kill everything in sight. Manatees, dolphins, fish, the economy, tourism takes a hit. Residents get sick. Politicians promise change. Nothing changes. In 2025, the Corps announced another drawdown. Standard procedure: lower the lake levels before hurricane season, just in case. By November, they dropped Okeechobee to levels not seen in decades. Vast mudflats emerged. Entire islands appeared. And that's when the drones went up. Researchers from the University of Florida and Florida Fish and Wildlife were conducting routine surveys, mapping the exposed lake bed, counting fish populations in the shrinking pools. Standard stuff. Boring even. Nobody noticed. Just hours of brown water, dead fish, and waiting birds having the buffet of their lives. Then someone spotted movement in one of the thermal imaging videos. Something large, moving in organized patterns. Not random, deliberate. They sent another drone, this time with high-resolution cameras. And there they were, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, occupying the deeper channels and holes where water still remained. The problem? These animals weren't supposed to be in Lake Okeechobee. They weren't supposed to be in Florida at all. Asian swamp eels. Monopterus albus. Native to Southeast Asia, India, and parts of the Western Pacific. They'd been spotted in Florida before. Sure, a few here and there in canals and ponds around Miami. Aquarium releases. Bait bucket dumps. The usual invasive species origin story. But this was different. The populations in Okeechobee weren't scattered individuals trying to survive. They were thriving. Breeding, forming massive aggregations in numbers that suggested they'd been establishing themselves for years without anyone noticing. And here's the kicker. The water in Lake Okeechobee isn't like the water in Miami's urban canals. It's colder in winter, more variable. These eels were supposed to be tropical specialists. Yet here they were, fat and happy in an environment they theoretically shouldn't tolerate. Asian swamp eels are nightmare fuel if you're a fish biologist. They can breathe air, literally just stick their heads up and gulp oxygen. This means they can survive in water so polluted or oxygen depleted that everything else dies. They can also travel over land, short distances. Yeah, but still. Imagine a fish that can walk to a new pond when its current one dries up. They're basically the cockroaches of the fish world, except worse because cockroaches don't eat everything. And they do eat everything. Fish eggs, baby fish, adult fish, crustaceans, insects, worms, pretty much anything that fits in their mouths, which are surprisingly large for an animal that looks like an angry shoelace. A single large swamp eel can consume its body weight in food every few days. Now multiply that by thousands, tens of thousands. Suddenly you're looking at an ecological bomb, but the plot thickens. Because the eels weren't alone, the lowered water levels revealed another surprise. Florida gauze. Lots of them. Specifically, massive Florida gauze that seemed to be coexisting with the eels in the same deep water refuges. This was unexpected because gars are ambush predators. They should be eating the eels. And maybe they were. But the footage showed something weirder. The two species appeared to be sharing space without the level of predation anyone expected. Scientists reviewing the footage kept pausing and rewinding, eels threading between gaze. Almost like they'd worked out some kind of truce. Or maybe the eels were just too abundant for the gauze to make a dent. Like trying to drink the ocean with a straw. Research teams were scrambling to get out to Okeechobee. They needed samples, tissue for genetic analysis, stomach contents to see what the eels were eating, population estimates to understand just how bad this had gotten. The answer to that last question? Really bad. Conservative estimates put the population in the hundreds of thousands. Some researchers, off the record, whispered about millions. The eels had colonized nearly every suitable habitat in the lake. They were in the vegetation mats, buried in the mud of the deeper holes, packed into the spaces around dock pilings and flood control structures. Everywhere humans had looked, they'd found eels. Lake Okeechobee is a keystone ecosystem. It feeds the Everglades. It supplies drinking water to millions. It supports commercial and recreational fisheries worth hundreds of millions of dollars annually. And now it's full of an invasive species that could fundamentally alter every food web it touches. The largemouth bass fishery alone is huge. Okeechobee is one of the best bass lakes in America. Tournaments bring in serious money. Guides make their living here. But bass spawn in shallow water. They lay eggs on vegetation. Eggs that are now getting vacuumed up by eels that can access places even other fish can't reach. Early reports from January 2026 showed a concerning drop in juvenile bass numbers. Not catastrophic yet, but trending wrong. Then there are the native species that don't get as much attention but matter just as much. The Everglades snail kite. A bird that eats exactly one thing: apple snails. And apple snails need specific aquatic vegetation to lay their eggs. Vegetation that's now competing with eel-eaten everything zones. If the eels crash the apple snail population, the kites are done. They're already endangered. This could be the final nail. The scientific community is divided on what to do. Some researchers advocate for aggressive removal, electrofishing, trapping, targeted poisoning, whatever it takes to knock the population back before it gets worse. Others point out that the cat's out of the bag, or the eel's out of the lake. Whatever, the population is too large and too widespread for eradication to be realistic. The best option might be management. Keep them at levels the ecosystem can tolerate, while protecting the most sensitive areas. But here's where it gets complicated. Some evidence suggests the eels might be eating other invasive species, specifically African cichlids and walking catfish, both of which are also wreaking havoc in Florida's waterways. Could the swamp eels actually be providing a service by controlling other invaders? Nature is weird like that. One person's nightmare is another ecosystem's unlikely hero. There's another angle nobody wanted to talk about publicly until the data forced the conversation. Climate change. Florida's winters are getting warmer. The cold snaps that used to kill off tropical invaders, they're becoming less frequent and less severe. Species that could only survive in the warmest parts of South Florida are now expanding north. The Asian swamp eels in Okeechobee might be the canary in the coal mine, or the eel in the lake whatever. If a tropical species can not only survive but thrive in an ecosystem that occasionally sees temperatures in the 40s Fahrenheit, what else is coming? What other species are waiting in the urban canals of Miami and Fort Lauderdale, ready to expand north as soon as conditions allow? The implications go beyond Okeechobee. Every lake in Florida could be vulnerable. Georgia, Alabama, Louisiana, the entire Gulf Coast. The footage from the drained lake also revealed something about human infrastructure. All those years of engineering, all those billions of dollars spent on flood control, and nobody had effective monitoring for invasive species in the deeper parts of the lake. The eels had been building their empire right under everyone's noses because nobody was looking in the right places. It's a reminder that humans are really good at managing the things we decide to pay attention to and completely blind to everything else. By late January 2026, the Army Corps began refilling the lake. Hurricane season was still months away, but agricultural demand for water meant they couldn't keep levels low indefinitely. As the water rose, the eels disappeared back into the murky depths. Out of sight, but definitely not out of mind. The discovery prompted emergency meetings in Tallahassee, federal and state agencies coordinating responses, research proposals flying. Everyone suddenly wanted a piece of the Lake Okeechobee eel problem. Money materialized. Grad students got excited. This was going to be studied to death. Which is good, because understanding the problem is the first step to managing it. But management is tricky. Swamp eels are notoriously hard to control. They hide in vegetation and mud. They can survive out of water for hours. Traditional fish removal methods don't work well. Poison? Sure, but you'll kill everything else too. And Lake Okeechobee can't afford more ecological disasters. Electrofishing, effective in canals but impossible to scale to a 730 square mile lake. Biological control? Introducing another species to eat the eels? That's how we got into this mess in the first place. The leading proposal involves a combination of approaches: intensive trapping in critical areas, particularly around spawning sites for native fish, installation of eel-specific barriers around water control structures, public education to prevent further releases, and most importantly, long-term monitoring to track population trends and ecological impacts. It's not sexy. It won't solve the problem overnight, but it might keep things from getting worse. There's also discussion about whether the eels could be harvested commercially. In Asia, swamp eels are considered a delicacy. They're farmed extensively. The meat is high in protein, and apparently tastes pretty good if you're into that sort of thing. Could Florida turn an ecological disaster into a food source? Some entrepreneurs think so. But there are regulatory hurdles. Who wants to eat fish from a lake known for pollution problems? The branding writes itself. Fresh Florida swamp eel. Caught in America's most managed lake. Packed with nutrients and possibly mercury. The Okeechobee discovery also reignited debates about Everglades restoration. The lake is supposed to act as a natural filter. Water flows south through the river of grass, getting cleaned by sawgrass marshes and algae-eating fish before reaching Florida Bay. But decades of agricultural and urban development have disrupted the flow. Too much water goes east and west to the coasts. Not enough goes south. The Everglades are dying, and now they might be receiving water full of invasive eels that could spread through the entire system. The Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan, launched in 2000, aims to restore more natural water flow. But it's decades behind schedule and billions over budget. Adding invasive species management to the mix complicates everything. Do you restore natural flows and risk spreading the eels? Or do you maintain artificial barriers and keep the Everglades isolated from their primary water source? There are no good options, only less bad ones. What's clear is that the footage from Lake Okeechobee represents a turning point. For years, invasive species in Florida were treated as isolated problems. A python here, a lionfish there. Local issues requiring local solutions. But the scale of the swamp eel population suggests something bigger is happening. Florida's ecosystems are being fundamentally restructured by species that aren't supposed to be here. And climate change is accelerating the process. The question isn't whether more invasive species will establish themselves. They will. The question is whether humans can adapt our management strategies fast enough to prevent complete ecological collapse. Lake Okeechobee is the test case. If we can't control invasive species in one of the most intensively managed water bodies in America, what hope do we have for the rest? The eels are still out there. Right now, swimming through dark water 30 feet below the surface. Eating, breeding, spreading, waiting for the next drawdown to reveal just how much ground they've gained. And when that happens, when the water levels drop again, and the drones go back up, we'll find out if anything we tried actually worked, or if the eels have already won.